It gives me great pleasure to introduce and greet our speaker for the day. Dr. Don Weatherspoon and I go way back. We were in school together at Michigan State back sometime in the last century. Don has been many things, and one of those is a great storyteller. So I'm sure we will learn a lot and enjoy it. Don, after playing on the national championship Michigan State football team back in '65 and '66, went on to complete his degree at Michigan State in police science, and then went to Eastern Michigan, where he earned his master's degree in social science and then he went to that other school down the road and got his PhD. And Don has been very passionate about being a guide, a help, a protector in some case, to youth. And his doctorate in educational administration was just a step in what he's accomplished. He's worked in several states. He's worked for several governors here in Michigan. One of the jobs that he had was one of the emergency managers under a former governor. He also shared with some of his childhood memories with me. One of those that stands out was when he was a kid living in southwestern Michigan. His mother took him to Goshen, Indiana to listen to a speech from Dr. Martin Luther King. And it left quite an impression on him, much of which was a foreboding for what could very well lie ahead at that time. That was 1958. And he was concerned about the nonviolence and what it could cause for all of us. So with that, Don's got a lot more important things to say than I, so I'll simply introduce Dr. Donald Weatherspoon.
Well, good afternoon. Before I begin my remarks, I'd like to say that my alma mater has suffered a real tragic week. And as I drove by campus this afternoon, I saw several students on Grand River, and it said Spartan Strong and all those things. And I would say that given my career, violence of this type is a new thing, a new phenomena, particularly when unsuspecting people are confronted with death, and then they end up thinking, is it going to be me? Am I going to be the next one unsuspecting because of the, of the amount of gun violence, etc.? I am not one of those who says you got to get rid of the guns. I need to tell you that right now. Our father was a hunter. He was in the military, etc., and I received my first rifle when I was 1 year old. However, what we are confronted with is mental illness. I used to work in the Department of Corrections. 70% of all prisoners needed mental health, no matter what their crimes were, and 70% of them were either victim or victimizers. I'll get to that in a minute. So I want to begin in terms of this journey to where I am today by saying that on my mother's side, her family was among the first 13 black families to move into Cass County, which is in the southwestern part of the state, We always do this, right? And that was a major underground railroad spot. So, as a boy, I learned about part of my history because Chain Lake Missionary Baptist Church is the oldest free missionary Baptist church in Michigan. It celebrated its sesquicentennial 2 years before the state of Michigan became a state. Our grandmother, and I've got two brothers here and a niece and a sister-in-law, was the church secretary when I was a boy. And the reason why I'm telling you that, because if you want to hear, see some history about farming, religion, race relations, etc., it's in the notes that my grandmother took, which are now at the MSU library. When Grandma died, those notes were me. And my aunt said, "What do you want to do with them?" And I gave them to Michigan State in the museum, and they copied them. So Governor Blanchard issued a resolution recognizing Chain Lake for its existence. And so if you drive on Calvin Hill, or Calvin Center Hill Road, whatever it is in Calvin Center, you'll see a historical plaque there. And that is the beginning of this journey for my family, even though we didn't stay with that church, and some of the things we believed in, and some of the things that influenced me throughout my life. So let me say that I am the eldest of 9 kids. Now, the brother I had a war with is right there. I was born before Dad went to war. He was born after. Okay? And I don't know what he was. But we, excuse me, in our family, we celebrated 123 continuous family reunions. So I'll be 80 in June of this year. So I can remember what the old people said when I was a boy. And some of those things were, you better learn as much as you can forever. So that means you better read. So we were taught to read in church, and we were taught to have social skills in church. We were taught to learn about your own history in church. And some of the people in the churches were not as articulate as I'm being with you today, because they did not know how to read. But they certainly knew how to use the stick, the Board of Education. They knew how to, use the gospel measure. If you bought something from them, it was always a just deal. Your handshake, your bond was your word. Those were the kind of guiding principles that stuck with us because we were farmers. And it did not matter whether or not you were a black farmer or a white farmer. And by the way, we grew up with Amish kids, a lot of Catholic kids, and the opportunities for each of us as farm kids were very limited. And I say very limited because we didn't have any money. Okay? So, my journey began with the following. As Ron mentioned, in 1958, Mom took me to see Dr. King at a religious college in Goshen, Indiana. And I didn't quite understand what was going on, really wasn't concerned about it. But I do remember in the back of my mind that 3 years earlier, Emmett Till had been lynched. I was 12 years old. Okay? Now that made a profound impact on a 12-year-old boy, because it said, do you have to look out over your shoulder for something that a kid could not be held accountable for? But living in the country, if anybody looked over your shoulder, you might see a squirrel or something else, or a cow that had gotten out or whatever, and you'd be mad at that cow, obviously. So our mind wasn't focused on those kinds of things. we did not see the kind of behavior in terms of divisiveness that we see today. So our attitudes were, we had to cooperate, we had to collaborate, and we had to create. You didn't have anything, you didn't have toys to play with, so you had to create. So going back to what Dr. King said, I can't remember that far back, but I do remember one thing was the emphasis on nonviolence. And you say, wait a minute. There have been fights or wars, our father had been in a war, and all those kinds of things. And yet, this man is saying no, no to violence. It's hard to put that together as a kid. So, you keep on moving. I came to Michigan State in 1962. There were 300 black people on campus, excluding athletes. Okay? Now, that says something. All right? Let me tell you the atmosphere in East Lansing at that time. If you were a black person, you could not go beyond Mack Avenue after dark. You could not buy a house or rent an apartment if you were a minority. If you wanted to go to downtown Lansing, you had to ride the Kalamazoo bus. It was things like that. Excuse me, I'm going to get some water. So, the only place where you could really express yourself was on the field of, in terms of football or basketball or whatever you did at that time. I was a, quote, walk-on football player, which means I did not have a scholarship. And nobody told me that I couldn't make it. And so all I figured I had to do was just show up and just compete like I always competed. Well, much to my surprise, everybody around me was a Superman of this, a Superman of that, had all kinds of scholarships, and I got mad. Why didn't they give me one? I didn't have the exposure, I didn't have a whole lot of things. So, well, I guess I better prove them wrong. So I decided to stick it out. My sophomore year, I made the traveling squad, which means you're the first 38. And I had never flown on an airplane, never done any of those kinds of things. And I find myself in a little gray jacket, my black suit, my tie, and we're going to Purdue and different places. And you're saying, this is not bad. So I got to knock some more guys in the head, and I'll keep staying on the team. Okay? We got to the point of this. We tied Michigan at Michigan. Okay? And he's smiling because he knows what happened. Don't tell the story. We got down to the last game of the season. We're going to play against Illinois. All we had to do was beat Illinois or tie them and go to the Rose Bowl. Now think about this little country boy out in the woods looking over his shoulder for squirrels and rabbits and cows, right? All of a sudden going to go to Rose Bowl? Fly on an airplane? Oh yeah. One thing happened. President Kennedy was shot. Okay? On the Thursday. So Friday, Coach Daugherty, Duffy, and the coach at Oklahoma State and a couple other coaches decided that they were going to confer about whether or not they should play on Saturday. The decision was, no, we're not going to play on Saturday. Some other teams did. We had to play on Thanksgiving Day, first in the history of Michigan State. All right? Now, you can imagine how you felt during that time. Imagine what we felt like. I don't care. And I didn't care about but one thing. I want to go to the Rose Bowl. It did not happen. Illinois beat us so bad on Thanksgiving Day, I wanted to whip a dead turkey. Dick Butkus, I'm sure most of you recognize that name, must have thought he was in a training video because he beat up so many guys. And I was sitting on the bench and I saw the guys that were bigger than me saying, no, I'm not going to say the words they said, but I said, okay. but you know what it starts with an S. Okay? So, a lot of those guys went on, and the next year, in 1964, we only won 4 games. Now, the reason why I'm saying these in sequential order is because of this. We lost to Michigan at home. The worst insult was we lost to Notre Dame at home. And the Notre Dame band beat our bands behind too. They took the plums from the hats, right? Now, I'm telling you this for a reason. So, the start of the 1965 season, we were predicted to be 0-0-0. Okay? In fact, I didn't have a very good year. I was injured in 64. And my decision and our decision was that we just weren't going to take it anymore. So let me now tell you part of the story, and I'll get into some of the racial things. Jimmy Ray, Bubba, and all those guys were freshmen. I'm sorry, sophomores at that time. Freshmen could not play. And we had, up to that point in time, in terms of preseason ball, been assigned rooms where you had a person play the same position and most of the time the same race as yourself. Okay? Whether it was done deliberately or not, I can't tell you. I don't know. I didn't make those room assignments. But there were 2 guys, and my brothers know who he is, and myself went into the room together. He was a white dude, okay? So he and I decided to get a hold of the trainer's room assignments, and I became the best forager that you can think of. Let's see, who would like to see someone? Okay. So I wrote in these names. I can't tell you how many fights there were because we did that. So the good part about it was the fights got over with real quick. Now, I would say the fights were not over race, the differences of just who we are. And Duffy used to say, I want somebody who wants to be mobile, agile, and hostile. He forgot one other word: full of testosterone poisoning. Okay? So there was a lot of expression of testosterone poisoning. All right? Now, remind you, we started unranked, losing season, prediction that we were not going to do anything. So the first game of the year came, and we beat UCLA at home by 10-3 or something like that. So then we, as a team, began to look at one another differently. And when I say differently, I mean it this way. When I look at you and I'm on the team with you, and we agree to a goal, we become part of something larger than ourselves. And that's what happened to us. As a matter of fact, we went to Penn State, and Penn State was a very strong team. Now, first I got to tell you, I think they put that school on the side of a mountain for a reason. Because when we flew in, the plane is tilted like this, it's going like this, and there are a whole lot of guys calling on their God and their creator saying, I'm going to die. Because the plane is doing this, and you're looking right over there, and there is the side of the mountain. So you're psychologically deranged, all right? So we could have kissed the ground when we got off that plane. So then we have to go over and get ready for the game. Remember I said the testosterone exercise that the expression of differences of opinion got settled back during early fall ball? What I didn't tell you is that about 6 guys stole a car and drove to Penn State to be with us, those who traveled. These are other members of our team who weren't on the traveling team. So we look up in the stand, we say, oh man, how'd you get here? Okay? It was a very heated game and highly contested. And almost at the very end of the game, one of the Penn State guys got around the end and got outside, and he was going for the touchdown. So this is where some of the stories come in that makes us a family as far as teammates are concerned. And I'll emphasize that more and more as I give you more examples. So Bubba and I played beside one another, and we had two rules. You don't let anybody get outside of you, and you always chase when the ball's going away from you. My job was to chase, and the kid was going downfield. So Bubba, you got the angle of pursuit. So you're going this way, and the angle of pursuit is basic triangle, right? So on film, this is what it looked like. He he galloped 5 yards a stretch. So that's how big his frame stretched out. And he cut the guy off and saved the game, all right? So then there was going to be a fight because Clinton Jones on offense got caught and there were some words, and we emptied the bench. You're not going to beat up on our brother. And the guys who stole that car, they came out of the benches. Okay? Now, these black and white guys, all right? Hank Bulla, who I wouldn't be here in terms of a former football player, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here. Hank starts yelling at us, and he's cursing us. So we finally get settled down. We're going to him and said, Coach, they were trying to get Clinton. What do you mean we're not supposed to? He said, I never told you not to fight. I told you don't you start a fight at an away game. Lesson number one, right? So after that, if you've read the quote by Clinton Jones says, we are family, that's where that came from, that game. The words were, now we are family. Okay? All right. As we went and progressed through the season, we won every game. Most of the time we had to pull the game out in the fourth quarter. Our defense is known as the greatest defense in the history of Michigan State. To illustrate that, to pay Michigan back at Michigan, in the first quarter, Bubba knocked out one kid, George Webster knocked out another kid, and then Mad Dog Thornhill got up and was doing this, talking about their mama. Now, let me tell you what that means. On our team, there are a lot of guys from the South and also a lot of guys from the North. They were just as strangers to us as they were to the white kids who came from the South and had never listened to some of the guys talk from the South. And I said, talk, all right? They could play. Oh, trust me, they could play. But we couldn't understand them, okay? I'll give an example. All of you have heard the term Uncle Tom, right? All of you have heard of Baba Pizza, right? You know who Baba Pizza was? He's a Hawaiian, a full-blooded Samoan. He and Dick Kenny were part of that team. Now, let me describe them. They had no neck. They had thighs and calves as big as tree trunks. And they walked around in sandals during the winter. And all they did was eat that rice. He said, man, no, nobody can eat that much rice and survive. But they did. So, I told you about Mad Dog Thornhill. There was another kid that came with him by the name Ernie Pasteur. Duffy had nicknamed them back in 1964 as Heckle and Jekyll. That wasn't racist. That was just people, he didn't remember the names. Okay? And at Michigan, when Dog started talking to people, he had a very deep voice, and Dog is deceased now. But he had started out as a running back, got converted to a linebacker. So a lot of the kids that came from the South became that. Now, let's go back to Pisa. The guys from the South called Pisa tome. He says, what's a tome? Now, we knew what it was, meant Uncle Tom. So the Bob would say, my name is Bob. No, Tom. What? So that cross-fertilization from a guy from Hawaii who had his own accent with the guys from the South with their own accents, you had to come to some kind of reconciliation, understanding one another. Invented our own language, okay, to talk about how the other team played against us, etc. So, as I said about that example of Mad Dog, he mumbling something about the boy's mama. I just got the mama part, I didn't get the rest. The dog was out of South Carolina, okay, as was Jimmy Ray, as was George Webster. So think about this for a minute. If you know somebody from the Carolinas and you know somebody from Texas, you know Texas talk a different way. I've got 2 grandsons in Texas. I keep wanting to say, don't start talking like that, okay? Starting with y'all, all right? So, when the Michigan game was underway, the one thing that always happens to Michigan State players is that the Wolverines lined the route we took from Ypsilanti, where we stayed in the hotel, to the stadium in Ann Arbor. Now, I won't give you the gestures, but they talked about us, our families, and gave us all kinds of birds, okay? Wishing us well, all right? So, one of my teammates, who is from Pennsylvania, son of a coal miner, he's a Catholic kid, so he crosses himself, and then he starts cursing, all right? And that's down the window on the bus, and he's yelling at these people, and you say, we are going to not make it to the stadium. So we're looking, again, for those cowls over your shoulders, all right? And we get to the stadium, and now we're so jacked up, you know, that another one of our teammates, who is from Mount Clemens area, wrapped his head with tape, and he bangs his head into the locker. Now, that's that testosterone poisoning I talked about. These guys were crazy. So how do we deal with that? Now, mind you, I'm not talking about race here. I'm talking about a family going off, right? Because all of us collectively decided to go in one direction. I need to also tell you that the boy from Pittsburgh had a bad foot. So and I don't know why, but we would put stuff in his shoe. He would never figure out there was something in his shoe. He just got madder. Okay? Now, that young man, he's an old man now, wasn't all that culturally proficient, as I should say. Sometimes words would come out of his mouth and say, uh-oh, the next block is going to be upside your head. Okay, and it happened, and we got over it. All right? But here are some things that were happening on campus at that time. Martin Luther King had a speech in 1963. I have a dream speech. That was in the spring. In the fall, we're fighting to play football. In 1964, we had a bad year. Malcolm X is assassinated. We didn't have a good team. 1965, we had a wonderful team, and we're gone. I'm going to finish with the 65 team, then I have some other things I need to share with you. One of the things that made me a part of the team that assisted me, and by the way, I did get a scholarship my senior year. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, by the way. Back then, $90 a month went a long ways. And I managed an apartment building, so I bought a new car. That's the first thing you knew I had in my life, okay? We got down to Notre Dame as I began that story. This kid, Viney, okay? I think we put something in his shoe before the game. I don't know what happened there. He goes crazy on the bus, and he lets down the window. Now, this is in Mishawaka, and we're going to South Bend, and he says, we're going to kick your, and our band's going to kick your band too. Okay, and the people are going, yeah, 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 you know, and doing all that stuff. So we get in there, and you got to understand, in the Notre Dame Stadium, it looks like a big bathtub with a statue of Jesus. It's like this. No, it's Mary. So we call that Touchdown Mary. All right? But I have to interrupt that and tell you two things. On the way from East Lansing to South Bend, we rode the train down. The ticket manager for Michigan State was from Cassopolis. Something he did with Duffy, I'll never know. But they stopped that train in my hometown, our hometown. And the community came out. And I say community, I mean everybody. So, I can tell you what I was doing. I was sleeping. And somebody said, Coach wants to see you. And I'm, oh man, I did something. I'm not going to play today, whatever. And I get out there, and then I'm on the platform, and there are all these kids. And I see my mom and my brothers and sisters, and I'm dumbfounded. Okay? That was a kind of spirit that we came to understand and appreciate about communities, about families, about that kind of collective decision-making and goal-seeking that we had, because we were undefeated up to that point in time. We beat Notre Dame, and then we got to go to the Rose Bowl. All right. That community sent my mother and our youngest brother to the Rose Bowl, and my dad had to stay home with the rest of the kids. Okay? So, what happened then and what's happening now is like two different worlds. Okay? So, I graduated from Michigan State. I was a free agent with the Lions, got cut. So then I went to the military as an enlisted reservist, and I wanted to go and play with the Oakland Raiders. I didn't. I got out of advanced training too late, so I didn't do it. So I went to California anyway. I became a police officer. So, a couple things happened. During that time was a lot of anti-war stuff. Not anti-race, but anti-war. However, there was a group called the Black Panthers, which represented not the anti-white stuff that you hear, but they were more of a social organization that fed kids and stuff like that. And they also believed in being able to open carry as far as weapons are concerned, which drove Ronald Reagan crazy when they marched in the Capitol, but that's neither here nor there. Okay? But the part that I want to get to is this. Remember I told you I saw Martin Luther King in 1958? I was on duty the day he was assassinated. Now, this is where you start talking about what will the community do, tight sphincter muscles, and sniper fire. Okay? Because all those things were happening in all of our communities around. You've all heard and read about what happens in has happened in Oakland, California over the years. Okay? They just couldn't control the anger and the violence. In the northern part of San Francisco, same thing. Our community had a different approach. I don't know why. I was the only black officer that had a degree at that time. So I was called into the mayor's office, or city manager, the mayor, chief of police, whatever. And he said, what would you do? I'm thinking, you're asking me? I'm a rookie? So I said, well, they want to march, you let them march. Put an armband on them, and we escort them. So for 3 days, we allowed people to vent their anger by marching. We escorted them. There were guys that I was looking for that had $300,000 warrants out for their arrest. And I'm looking, oh, man, wouldn't it be nice? Okay? Didn't touch them. We had zero violence for 3 days. Zero violence. No domestics, no B&Es, no armed robberies, nothing. And you say to yourself, how can this happen when the country was, as far as I was concerned, at level 2 or level 3 of alert? And by the way, I need to share with you what dispatch told us at that time. Dr. King has been assassinated by a white male who is in flight. So we are switching to 12-hour shifts, no time off, no sick leave, and black officers cannot ride with black officers. You must ride with a white officer. You must get both radio and visual identification before you re-enter the yard when we brought our police cars. If you fail to do that, you will be shot. Now, wait a minute. I got this funny uniform on, and everybody's mad at all of us for this uniform, and you're going to shoot me? Okay? Well, it didn't happen. And I can say that our city was one of the few cities that took the whole issue of something so volatile and took it to a different level and said, no, we're not engaging in this behavior. We're not going to be repressive because, by the way, anybody who's ever been in uniform as far as law enforcement is concerned, that the ratio is usually 1 to 300 or 1 to 3,000, 1 cop per 3,000, 1 to 300. You're not going to win with your little pea shooter, okay, and a 100-pound mouth. As a matter of fact, one of the things we did is I rode back and forth. I lived in Oakland. I rode back and forth with another rookie officer who happened to be white. And Paul said to me, he said, well, Spoon, he said, look, I got this figured out. You talk to the blacks, I'll talk to the whites. Okay, good with me. He said, but don't let your 100-pound mouth get your 10-pound behind in trouble. I said, I'm good with that too. Okay? So, I also need to share with you that in this day and age, you hear the issue of defund the police and stuff like that, right? Because of violence committed by police officers. What if one little thing? We were taught, going back to those lessons as kids, if you show respect, you'll get respect, okay? I don't care what kind of uniform you have on. I don't care if you're an athlete, whatever. You always have to show that respect. It will be returned to you in kind. So, Paul and I rode together, and we never had any difficulties. I think during the time I was in uniform that maybe I had to pull my weapon twice. I was prepared to use it like I'd been trained, but didn't have to go that far. I had one fight, and that was only because the guy didn't want to get out of his truck. He was high on some kind of stuff. And, oh, by the way, I did learn a lesson. I'm arguing with this guy, and my senior officer comes up to me and he goes, what's going on? I said, this dummy won't get out of the truck. He said, what's the problem? He talks to the guy, no. He takes out some little spray, go, So dummy me learned real quick. There are alternative ways of trying to beat up somebody. Again, the respect factor, all right? So, move the tape forward. At the end of the time, because I signed a contract to go with Montreal LOS, but in transit, while I'm moving across the country to go from California to Montreal, Bobby Kennedy gets shot. All right? Now, you start thinking about what's happened in my lifetime to this point. All the people that have been shot, but not like today. All right? Whole different ballgame, whole different landscape. All right, so, as Ron mentioned, I did come back to Michigan, and I worked as a probation officer for Ingham County Court. As a matter of fact, I neglected to mention he and I used to work at the old Lansing Boys Training School. I was in maximum security. He was over with the little boys, but he's the one who got knocked upside the head, not me. Max? Okay, both of us worked Max. And what Ron alluded to in terms of my background is this. I went on and I changed professions. I got into early childhood education. So all the stuff that I had seen on the streets, in probation, whatever, harken back to one thing. If you don't give them a chance, if you don't tend to them, if you don't help them learn how to read, What do you expect? And if there are problems, they're not racial problems. They're problems of mental health. What do you expect? I had to give a speech one time when I talked to some businessmen in Ohio, and the book was, I had to review a book called The Promised Land, and I don't remember the author's name. And I read the book, and I'm thinking, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. What I said to these businessmen who had 2 drinks after a nice meal is that this is the way I see this. The author doesn't know what he's talking about. 2, if you don't pay for the education of these kids and figure out where their problems are, when you're on your bed in your nursing home with your depends, your medicine missing, and your head sore because you didn't behave, because now you have a mental health problem, you wonder what happened. So the old question is, do you pay now or do you pay later? And there are a couple ways you pay later. One, you can pay with your own body, or the other way, you're going to pay for it and be in prison. Okay? So now let's talk about where we are in terms of the racial divide. The most, I read what is going on in terms of state politics, and I've been involved in state politics a long time as an administrator. You hear things that, like CRT, critical race theory. That's a whistle, a wolf whistle. Okay, it's a theory. It's something somebody wrote. Now, in 1963, were we worried about that? No. Did we know our history? I knew what my history was. I can't say that my teammates did. Okay? Is it worth telling everybody what their history is? I think it is. All right? But you can't tell that history in a confrontational way. It happened. What about the Native Americans? What about the Chinese Americans, Asian Americans? Okay? So we can't just identify one select group and say they're the cast outs. Okay, now I want to go back and say another thing. When my mother told you about Bob Pisa being called Tom, all right. The other Hawaiian was a guy named Richard Kinney, who was a barefoot kicker. Okay, that was my roommate on the road. Now, he was a little old lady as far as I was concerned. No offense, please. I had to get my Thursday nights, because on Friday nights, all I heard about all of his worries and his girlfriend. And all I would say to him is, look, Dick, kick the ball through the uprights and let me sleep. Okay? That's all you have to do. All right, but here's what happened. Dick retired and became, he was a teacher, and he went back to Hawaii, and he worked for an airlines for a little extra money. He got free airfare. So he and our teammates would convene on the West Coast once or twice a year. Now remember, I keep coming back to this family thing. Half of us, no, not half. Yeah, half of us are either dead or have some form of CTE or some other orthopedic osteoporosis or whatever. But we still have that common bond. And what we can't understand is why can't people see that you're a part of a bigger picture and that you have to show respect to get respect, that you're never going to win if you keep each other mad, scared, or jealous of one another. That's the oldest formula to keep people going at each other. And by the way, a whole lot of money is made, because if you look at the price of gun sales, all I got to do is say to him, since you already knew the answer, I'm going to shoot him. What's he going to do? He's going to say, oh, come on, shoot me? No, I'm going to get a gun. Okay? If I make him the enemy and say all kinds of things about it, I make him the enemy, he's going to go out and defend himself. That is not what we are about as far as my team is concerned, our orientation is concerned, and not one time did my coach or any of my coaches ever allude to those kinds of behaviors. Not one time. I don't know what they thought outside, but on the field, that never happened. When we played together, we were a part of a larger group. That's what happened. The record that we left has never been matched before or after 1965. Now, I'll answer any questions you like. Don't ever die. I'm sorry?
I remember all these people you're talking about.
Well, good. I'm glad. No questions?
I have a different question.
Yes.
Do you still have family in Cassopolis?
We have so many family members down there, we have to tell them, don't crossbreed.
I travel through there all the time, and they have made such different progress there. I just love to drive through there and see all the changes that are happening currently in Cassopolis. But I love Stony Lake, and I like driving through there. I grew up in that area, so
Where?
well, little town called Three Oaks.
I know that. We know it. Yeah. Why you say it? Yeah, that's part of the history. I need to share with you part of the history of Cassopolis, or Cass County. The first case where the Interstate Commerce Act was challenged was in Cass County. The first police force in the United States is the Slave Patrol. The Slave Patrol came to Cass County. They were going to return the so-called property of a slave owner in the South. The abolitionists said that's not going to happen. So they said, we'll have a trial. It's the first time in the state of Michigan that a black man was allowed to testify against a white man in court. The court ruled in favor of the abolitionists. That case was never appealed because it didn't want to become law. So if you drive through Cassopolis, there is a mural on one of the old buildings depicting that court scene, because that's part of our collective history. Yes?
So what do you think is a solution or several solutions to the issue of the mental health crisis?
Well, I'm a very, very biased person when you ask that question. I was budget director for the legislature in Maryland when that happened, when deinstitutionalization was introduced, Reagan. And the idea of, quote, community mental health, all it meant to me was that we're going to set up a structure at the local level with people with a lot of job titles, but no training to deal with the issues before them in their communities, number one. Number two, when people were released from the mental health institutions or prison or jails, what happened to them? They went right back to where the first stop of the bus. So those communities began to immediately experience a whole lot of mental health problems, okay, and they had no coping mechanism. So if their home area got all this money from mental health, these people over here starving, these people had at least had a hierarchical structure. So we have to restructure everything with regard to the way we look at mental health. And to go further, like I said, I retired from the Department of Corrections. We had the worst time trying to find mental health resources for vets who had been convicted. Okay? We went to the Veterans Administration. We said, look, we want these guys to come out and we want them to be successful. Okay? They said no. And the reason why they said no is because we don't have enough for the guys who are not in prison. So they have to come first. So the department was kind of caught in a quagmire because they couldn't do that. Now, there is an appropriation every year. The legislature does, Congress does, and you don't see a demonstrable growth in appropriations for mental health. That starts. The second one, the colleges and universities aren't producing people in that field fast enough to meet the needs. Now we're going to get into, now I'm going to go down to another level. In 1999, I was the first safe school officer. I'm sorry, I was assistant state superintendent, and I was charged with developing a policy for local school districts. And so I went to FEMA training and all that other stuff, right? 2 weeks after I returned from FEMA training, Columbine happened. All right? What did we learn from Columbine? Those kids had demonstrated, the shooters had demonstrated some mental health issues. They call them goths, G-O-T-H-S, okay? Walked around with the black coats on and stuff like that. Just wearing a black coat doesn't make you mentally ill. But they had written some things that someone should have said, hey, we have a problem here, we need to talk about it. We need to get them help. Shortly after that, the shooting in Beecher, Kayla, okay, 6-year-old girl, shot by a boy, her classmate, because she wouldn't kiss him. All right? He didn't know. The uncle went to jail because he had an unregistered weapon. But that boy had demonstrated some things. Now, recently, we had the Oxford situation. Okay, that boy clearly had some problems. And because the schools were constrained with what they did not refer him to the county, and the parents weren't cooperative. So having worked for the court, if it had been me, I would have had some kind of petition to remove him from the home so he could be treated properly. So the training of personnel, the identification of people, and then speaking up. That means also all of us have to recognize when somebody's a little off. So when you see a street person and they're talking to themselves, you're not supposed to go over to them and say, oh, can I help you, and give them all your money. That is not what I'm advocating. Okay, but why on the street? Because if they're in this community, you're not going to have more than 2 or 3. In Lansing, you have a bunch. Okay? So Lansing has to address this problem. Detroit has a huge problem. Okay? Grand Rapids is just growing in terms of issues. So it becomes a movement of us understanding what we have to do for people who are in distress, all the way down to infants. And my brother, who is a former superintendent, can also add to this. He got crack babies in school, did you not? We were not prepared for crack babies. So that means that special ed in schools are a huge issue. Not properly funded, and people who ignore the needs of special needs kids, as far as I'm concerned, need to be put in jail. Because all you're doing is multiplying, magnifying that problem of those children. And they don't deserve that, because if they grow up and they don't have the proper coping skills or medication or training or whatever, we pay for it doubly. I hope I didn't. Okay. Yes, vote.
I know maybe you can't answer this, but how do you get past, everyone's so into a person's rights, and you can't, all these people that need so much help, when you try to reach out to them, that's, it's so personal that, what I'm trying to say, it's such a personal issue that you can't get involved in, or go into someone's home and take a child out that is in trouble. How do you get past all of that? How can you really help someone when there's so many laws that say, well, you don't have a right to interfere in, their personal life, or?
Well, I got to tell you that I don't have the answer, but I have an idea of an approach that's been used. And it started with the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church had so much backlash because of the behavior of their personnel, okay? And they spent so much money defending that. And they were losing membership, et cetera. So they said, wait a minute. We've got to figure out another way. So they developed what is known as listening circles. They said, okay, you bring people in and you say, what is on your mind? Everybody gets a chance to express their feelings about the subject. And there's a question. You all have to answer the same question. And the rules of the game are you must listen to the other person. The answers to the questions are recorded, and then they're reported out to a larger group. And through that, they come up with a solution in terms of, an approach, not a solution, as to how to attack that problem. One way is to have a few more listening circles so we can appreciate where each of us are coming from. Because right now, if we talk about things like equity means something to every one of us, okay? In schools, it means, do I have the same opportunity to learn the content and to achieve as everybody else? That doesn't mean the same amount of money. It means the same opportunity and resources that helps me become competitive. For some people, it says maybe it's gender identity. Okay? The fight is on for anybody who says they want to express their own individuality and they want to be protected. And by the way, from the beginning of the civil rights, and I got to say that our parents would march for the ability to go to a beach, okay, right after church, and we're in the car as hot as all get out, and they're out there in their suits on the sand. To today, we have LGBTQ saying it's their civil right. So some of the old civil rights people are saying, wait a minute, this is not what civil rights is about. And these people say, oh, yes, it is. Okay? But it's not for us to determine whether this is you're right or not. If you say this, I'm not hurting anyone, and this is what I believe, you got to go with that.
But down the road, they do hurt someone. So what I'm saying is that, how do you make that judgment call that possibly this person is going to hurt someone? When they exhibit certain behaviors ahead of time, how do you make a judgment call
Well,
that we should take this person out of society or away from others because down the road they could possibly hurt someone?
the beautiful part of what you're saying is we do have medication, okay, and we do have counseling, and we do have early warning signals that we look for. That's standard. Every text has that, but we don't have the training. We don't have the tolerance, and we don't have the will to move off certain standards to incorporate where somebody different is saying what they want to be. Now, I got to tell you, I'm laughing inside because companion animals, I saw a cartoon. No, it was actually not a cartoon. It was a picture of a woman going through a drive-in, getting a drink, herself and her companion baby, miniature pony. And the pony had his head sticking out the window, talking at to the microphone, whatever it was saying, got a Coke, okay? Now, companion animals, when they get into boa constrictors and stuff like that, I think you can have it go away from me. I don't think I can answer your question. Yes, ma'am.
I worked for 20 years with mental health here in Clinton, in the county, and worked in the Tri-County jails as a supervisor for counseling programs, addiction services. And one of the most powerful things that we could do was one of the most powerful things, yeah, I scared myself too. Gotta hold it out. I have a powerful voice. Was doing group therapy. And like you said, listening is one of the most powerful things because most of the men that I worked with, nobody ever listened to. And they would tell me, Miss Cates, you're the first person that actually listened to what I said. And it astounded me in the beginning, and to let them talk. And then I taught them relaxation and guided meditation. And inevitably, somebody would fall asleep and start snoring. And they'd have somebody poking the guy who was snoring. And I'd say, let him be, let him be. He's relaxed. It's finding that safe place, that listening circle, that time for they were out of themselves or their common area, where somebody listens. And I had a staff of 6 in the Ingham County Jail. And Jean Rigglesworth, my predecessor as the manager of the jail counseling services, set up the best program that is still working very hard in both corrections, mental health, and substance abuse services in the jail. And Lansing right now is developing with one of my former employees, looking at counselors riding with police. And there's a special name for it, and I've forgotten it. But anyway, you know, that they're looking at ride-alongs. They're looking at what happens, as she was saying, when you suspect someone. You know, the law kind of ties our hands, but if you're not a danger to yourself or somebody else, right now, we can't hospitalize you unless there's been some reason. And it's so hard because I saw so many people in outpatient counseling that I knew they were a ticking time bomb. And there was absolutely nothing I could do because at that point, there was no plan. You know, it's like people with suicidal ideation. Do you have a plan? Do you know how you would do it? It's the same thing when we're looking at somebody with mental health concerns that might be schizophrenic. And community mental health, as you know, was set up for the severely mentally ill and those with developmental disabilities. And then down the road, we got substance abuse services. And I'm very proud to say that Clinton Eaton Ingham Community Mental Health is one of the first and foremost in drug addiction in the state of Michigan. But it's hard. It's hard. You can't say, it's like somebody, you might have a car accident, so you better not drive that car. You know, we can't say, you seem unstable, but I can't put my finger on it if you're going to go out and shoot somebody. And we can't predict it. That's, you know, I wish we had that magic wand. I don't want to take over here, but
No, and I know that, I think Ron said an hour, so I know I've reached that hour mark. I want to tell you 2 things. I am standing here today because of something that I did. I had no idea of the impact. On April Fool's Day, 1968, I was in a hurry in my patrol car to get to the gas station, fill up so the next shift could use the vehicle, and go home and get some sleep. I pulled into the gas station. There's a Thunderbird looking at me. Both doors are open. And the attendant comes out and says, "I'm being robbed." I said, "You mean tell me somebody's going to rob the gas station where the cops come and fill up?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Run." So he takes off. This guy comes out of the gas station. He said, "Give me $2 worth of gas. I got to go to work." That's when my brain said, "Fool, you better get moving because you have just walked into something that it's out of your control." What we call it out there was 211 in progress. I didn't have time to get on the radio. I didn't have time to put my helmet on. I didn't have time to strap my weapon. So I rolled out of the patrol car and told the guy, "Come here." So while I'm patting him down, my ID technician pulls up, and he says, "You know, what's going on?" I said, "We got 211. I think I got one inside." Inside was another guy. He had a 12-gauge shotgun, pump, safety off. So he came out. So we did the crime scene, and yes, the guy had the gun, and he had pulled down on me. Okay? I did not know this. So when I processed him in jail, I pulled the guy and said, "Hey, man, look, come talk to me. Why didn't you pull that trigger?" He said, "Man, you arrested my cousin 3 weeks ago, and you treated him like a man, so I figured I'd let you go." And I'm going, ooh. So as I was driving home, oh, that's when it hit me. Okay? So that's been a guiding rule of mine. When I said to you, don't let your 100-pound mouth get your 10-pound in trouble. Well, I'm glad I showed respect to that guy because he had the first move. And I think that one of the things that, going back to what you were saying, a safe place for each of us to go. We don't have that, okay? We only have it in our own families in some instances, all right? So how do you start the conversation? You need to start that conversation among yourself and maybe have even a little listening circle to see an answer to a question. Why do I feel this way today? About. You fill it in. Take notes and then discuss what would be your approach to it. Like I said, the Cook Foundation in Owasso has started that, and I'll give Ron the web address of the university in Pennsylvania that's really picked up on this. And like I said, it all started with the Catholic Church. My last thing for you, because of what I call blood, sweat, and tears, that's what I called my years in football. I get this, there's a Rose Bowl, and this is the Big Ten championship from Michigan State. So I'll let Ron let you see those if you want to see them. Thank you very much for having me. You like that? Yeah. The people would look.
Thank you so much for being here and giving of your time. The word reparations is often knocked around these days, and many writers, Ta-Nehisi Coates, for example, talks about how some of our most esteemed institutions of higher education, Harvard, Princeton, even the dome of our Capitol building in D.C. was built on the backs of slaves who were never appropriately reimbursed, not just for decades, but for centuries. So there's a movement, obviously. I think it was Congressman Dingell, the many years he was in the U.S. Congress, would bring forth that issue every year and never made it out of committee, I don't think. Do you have any thoughts about reparations, if they're appropriate, if it could be done, if we should not think about it, if we should move forward and forget? Anything? Okay.
And I would say that it won't work, okay? Because people today's society, I had nothing to do with what people did 200 or 300 years ago, all right? Doesn't mean that what's been passed down in terms of what you've been taught in terms of your books, et cetera, of what happened and your understanding of it. But our country looked at the issue of tribal land and tribal trust and set aside large trusts which are managed not by the tribes, but by the interior, all right? So let's just take the tribe up in the Chippewas, all right? If you are more than 10% and can document it, Chippewa, you get a monthly stipend, okay? But you also get free health and health care if you're on the reservation. But the part that is overlooked in those trusts is where is the education support for those people who happen to have 10 or 25% more blood in them from that indigenous population to go to school? They cut that back every year. That doesn't make any sense. We have severe diabetes, severe high blood pressure, drug use, etc. And I'll tell you what really irks the people way up in the western part of the UP is now gang behavior within the tribes. They're trading alcohol, drugs, etc., and they're dividing the tribal structure up. Part of that is we don't have a cadre of people to deal with that new kind of a problem, to confront the new way of doing business with these youngsters who are going in the wrong direction versus the customs that they want to preserve. We're even losing their language. So, to directly address what I believe, if you fall into a socioeconomic strata, there has to be a trust for you. I don't care what your race is. So I have mixed race children. I have there are mixed races in our family, and we better not have a discussion about black or white or green or whatever in our family because somebody's going to get a brick upside their head. No, I'm serious. Okay, so the dilution is there. I mean, I just did Ancestry.com, okay? And so I find out that my DNA goes back to Nigeria, Cameroon. Oh, guess what? Wales, Scotland, Ireland. So, oh, somebody was creeping. Okay? And so you're going to hear people say, well, I'm this. No, you better check your DNA before you start running your mouth. All right? But the most important part is we do not stress, and because I'm an advocate for kids, if we can't teach our kids how to understand their history and project to their future, we're dead. Okay? And Ron mentioned one thing that I did. Do y'all understand what the word emergency manager? Okay, so there's the other one. That doesn't fall all on me. So two of us are the senior most former emergency managers in Michigan. Why were we chosen to be that? One, because we're in education. Two, we advocate for kids. But three, we were black, because we were in predominantly black in, school districts. Wrong criteria. You had to know something about education. You had to know something about finance. You had to know something about organizations, etc., in order to do the stuff we did. And the stuff that we had to deal with had nothing to do with what was going on in the classroom. So if you really want some nightmare stories, bring me back and I'll tell you some. Thank you very much. Yeah, this gentleman has a question. Yes, sir. And I appreciate your jacket today.
I don't know what years you were there, but
1962, I'm an old man. I graduated in 66.
I'm older. Did you ever encounter Abby Eaton?
Who?
Abby Eaton and his son Gregory?
Yes. Gregory, yes, absolutely.
I'm working on a book with Gregory right now to tell his story, but he had a fantastic story about his father, how when Duffy was recruiting, he couldn't, some of the black players were concerned about coming up here because they couldn't have any place any restaurants, and there were even churches that were telling him, we don't want you there. But Abby and Gregory was the little brother to all the players. The family would go up and get in this family station wagon, they'd go up and get the black players and bring them home, and they would have fried chicken dinner. And Gregory to this day says, can't go wrong with chicken. But it took somebody to just begin to make the East Lansing a better place. Down the road, we had situations like Bobby Mann and what was his name? Teammate of Jerry Ford's, I forget him right now. They even roomed together. But did you happen to touch on that, or some of the people that were critical along the way?
Well, I would say this. Greg Eaton was the first person who made himself known to me, invited me to his home. I didn't get fried chicken. I'm mad. But I remember he played music on his real expensive Macintosh receiver, and I forgot the turntable, whatever. But he played jazz, and he made it known that if I ever needed anything, needed a place to go, I could come to his house. No questions asked. And to this day, he is still that same way. He is an honorary member of the Varsity S Club, and he's never missed a Super Bowl. He was in the newspaper for having attended every Super Bowl. I met him when he first had his janitorial service, and then he went to work for the Automobile Dealers Association. He's a very wealthy man. When I go to his house, I look at 2 Bentleys under a canvas. I'm saying, that's a lot of mopping floors, man. But he's a wonderful person, absolutely wonderful person.
The reason he's gone to all these Super Bowls is because there's always been a Michigan State connection. He started with Herb Adderley, but he credits Michigan State, and none of these stories have ever really talked about that what Gregory and his family did for a lot of the black players that were being recruited. And I just think that someday, when somebody writes that Super Bowl story, they should talk about that.
Well, there's some things that I can say in church and some things I can't. No, because there are some legendary guys who help with the recruiting off campus. And let's say it this way. They would take those young guys and they would blow their minds. I worked at the Kellogg Center as a bellman because I didn't have a scholarship. So I used to check all those guys in. And I would remind them that I would see them in the spring. So that's how I got to know them. There was a question. Yes, sir. 1965 and 6. No, 65 and 66. 65, 66, and a little bit of 67. I was in Michigan Hall.
Well, I'm not saying anything.
No.
You had a bowling pin out there.
Yeah, I'm sorry, what?
You had a bowling alley?
I don't remember bowling alley. I know we had a field house. There was?
We never went to it.
When I say max security, we were locked down 24/7.
Yeah, I just been hearing stories about it.
Man,
Wasn't Michigan State one of the very first schools to allow a black team to play? I remember seeing a story about that there was a team that was trying to find a place to play, and Michigan State was the one that let them come from the South and play.
I don't remember that story, ma'am. That one doesn't come to mind.
There was a program called Red Cedar,
Oh, well,
and it was about a team many years ago, and I thought it was Duffy Daugherty that was one that opened the gates there.
it would, okay. Okay, I don't know that, but the Red Cedar, Through the Banks of the Red Cedar is a movie about Gene Washington written by his daughter Maya, who was not born, and she had to learn about that. There's another movie called Men of Sparta by Bob Mapisa. Okay, and then more recently there's the NFL story about Jimmy Ray. Okay, so there are a lot of stuff that's coming out. Tom Shaney is part of the group that's writing about Jimmy. But here's the thing. they identify these individuals, but they don't talk about the team. We look at it as a team, okay? So if you look at the individual stories of how we collectively came together, that's a whole powerful dynamic that nobody can deny. I appreciate what those guys have done. We applaud them. I'm in a couple of movies. I run my mouth. But that's just a small smidgen of what really happened. For example, what he just said, I don't know how many guys went to see Greg. And I can tell you now, I don't know how many young men even know Gregory. Okay? As a matter of fact, when George Perlis was coach, I went to George and I said, look, and also to D'Antonio, I said, look, I'm in touch with every law enforcement organization you can think of. So there's not a move your boys can make that I don't know about. I want to give you a heads up. And they took care of their problems. That was the same thing arrangement that Duffy had when we were in school. And when Ron and Anthony and I worked together, they had to work out in the shop changing tires. I was a store detective. I had air conditioning. But my challenge was some of my teammates would come in and steal from Fox Jewelers and then get returns without a receipt from Sears. So that's what I didn't want to say at church. Any more questions? Thank you.
Folks, Don did give me his rings here, so before I put them in my pocket, if anybody would like to come up and look at them. But thank you very much, Dr. Weatherspoon. That was outstanding.